Young adults have a genre of literature all their own, but it seems many adults are peering over their shoulders, enjoying adventure tales of spirited and sometimes very special adolescents who are thrust into extraordinary circumstances. I'm hooked. Today I've invited 3 authors of young adult literature to join me for a conversation about this increasingly popular niche. My guests are Amalie Howard, Emmy Laybourne, and Annabel Monaghan. Stay tuned for what is sure to be a spirited discussion. I'm Alice Bloom. This is A Town and Village 2. Welcome back. Let me introduce you to my guests. Amalie Howard, an old friend. You've been here many times before, and we enjoy having her again today. Amalie is a 17 magazine summer club author. She writes tales of adventure for young adults, most recently Bloodspell, Waterfell, Almost Girl, and Alpha Goddess. That's just the most recent ones. We know there are many more. Emmy Laybourne is a writer and a recovered character actor who tells us she appeared in the movies Superstar and The In-Laws. She's the author of the Monument 14 series, I Am Gripped, I must tell you. And Annabel Monaghan is the author of Double Digit and A Girl Named Digit. Answer to Nancy Drew. Is she the most modern Nancy Drew?
She's a very modern Nancy Drew.
Yes. Yeah. I saw a lot of similarities. Well, thank you all for being my guests. Now, you all write for a genre we call young adult literature, a genre that probably is relatively new. What do you think has catapulted young adult literature into the forefront these days?
Well, I think that we can thank J.K. Rowling. Really, I think that Harry Potter and the phenomenon that it was, that it was a series that crossed all the generational lines. And so young people, like kids were reading it, adults were reading it, I read it every book in my bathtub with great delight. I think it made people aware that they could cross the lines, that they could start to read younger, and then the kids who were reading it grew into adults who were also willing to cross younger.
Well, I know when I was reading Harry Potter, I was not in the bathtub, I'd read it at the gym, walking the treadmill. Only I couldn't get any reading done because everybody wanted to talk about it.
Right.
Now, that was geared towards, what, 3rd grade, 6th grade?
Yeah, middle grade, probably.
Middle grade, probably.
Above.
And for the first time, adults could admit that they were reading young adult literature. Do you find that you have adults telling you that they read your books, Amalie?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think a large part of my reading audience is, probably upwards of 17, not necessarily the 12 plus that the publishers put on the book. But I do agree with Emmy that, Harry Potter was definitely like the trendsetter. Everybody wanted to read it. Also got kids reading, which I think parents got excited about, teachers got excited about. And then, Twilight, take that book, which whether you hate it or love it, it made people like want to buy books, read the books, borrow the books from libraries. It was just, it was like very, kind of viral. It had a life of its own.
You know what I saw about these books too, is that for the first time it created a conversation between young adults, adolescents, and their parents. I have 3 kids of my own, and I always found it very hard to talk to them. They just shut me down if I tried to talk about their books. And for the first time, my daughter, who was in college, said, "Mom, did you pick up the new Harry Potter book? Did you get it yet? Because I'm dying to read it." And it created a conversation because you don't talk really a lot with your
But it helps you to connect to that time. It's such a powerful time when you're an adolescent and you're falling in love for the first time and you're doing so many things for the first time.
Yes.
And I remember when my friends were reading Twilight and they were calling, they're like, remember how that felt? And it sort of brings you back to that time. And if you're raising adolescents, I think it makes you a little bit more compassionate about what they're going through.
I think it certainly does for a lot of parents because we get caught up in real life problems and forget what it's like to be a young adult or
definitely.
a teen. Do you think that to be a young adult author, you have to be in touch with your teenager?
I think the voice has to be authentic. I think you can't, a lot of teens are savvy enough to pick up if someone's writing and they sound adult. It's something that a new teen would say. So I think you do have to have some, either connect with the person you were when you were 16 or, interact with a bunch of teens and figure out how they talk. what kind of slang they use, how they'd react to a specific situation. I mean, and it's also different now, you know, than it was, say, for me when I was a teen.
Now, how do you do that? How do you connect to that teenage self?
God, you know, I worked as an actor before I became a novelist, and so I use a lot of character building acting exercises to try to tap into how somebody talks. And for me, often it has to do with actually how they hold their body. So if I'm preparing, if I'm creating a cast for a new book that I'm going to write, I'll sometimes go to the mall and I follow kids around. It sounds creepy. I know it sounds creepy.
There's a watch
but
list.
I follow them around and I watch their gait, and I'm just studying, like, well, that's how a kid who's really confident and doesn't care looks and feels in the world, and that's how a guy who's being picked on at school and doesn't want to be seen walks, and it helps me to get into their minds. Yeah.
Huh. So you're actually writing a story about the kids that you see.
As I watch them.
As you watch them. I mean, you're making up a story. We don't know if it's true or not, but you're concluding that it is.
Absolutely. I think that kind of being, research out on the street and that talking to teenagers and listening to what they say is very important to be able to relate who they are.
I do it in Starbucks. I eavesdrop. I do. I sit and listen.
And do you
to
write
the local
what
police?
they say?
I sometimes write down what they say, but the way they talk, it's just so different from what you imagine you might have said when you were 15.
What I think is interesting about the voice too is it once you've gotten into the voice, it's easy to keep going and it's easy to write. But when you stop writing and you have to be 44 years old and go pick up your children and engage in your real life, you lose the voice. So when I'm writing, and I'm writing in first person here, I have to actually start on page 1 and read all the way through to page 175 where I am in the book to get back into the voice.
Really?
Which is why it's annoying when the phone rings.
Yeah, really sequester yourself.
You have to, because otherwise you come back with the wrong perspective. It's hard for me to hold on to.
Not me, I'm schizophrenic. I flip right back in.
Do you?
Oh yeah.
What a blessing.
It's very lucky. Now, Digit, of course, is a real genius.
Yes.
She's a mathematical genius. How did you research, or maybe you are, I don't know, I don't want to conclude that you're not,
Well,
but how did you research what a math genius would know? I mean, the formulas and the kinds of things she's able to do are pretty amazing.
They're pretty amazing, and I had not heard of any of them before I started writing this book. So I had an idea for her to be a math genius, and then I had to create a math genius. So I would Google things like cool math tricks, and there are books, and there's so many books that are published for children who are interested in this kind of thing, and how to decode the barcode on the back of your book, or all these kinds of things. So I learned from the bottom up, because I am not a math genius, I'm afraid.
Were your kids impressed?
My kids are very hard to impress.
Very hard. Did anyone say to you, why didn't you just ask us, Mom?
Right.
You probably don't realize the talent you have right here at home.
Yeah, you
Could be
can't be
tough.
a prophet
Now, how
in your
about
own
for
home.
Monument? Now, that's a pretty amazing book. I don't want to
Oh,
I don't want to give it away, but I mean, we're talking about an almost Armageddon-like situation.
Yeah, Monument 14 tells the story of 14 kids who get trapped in a superstore while civilization collapses outside the gates. And it was a lot of fun coming up with the terrible things that befall these children.
Now, are these your worst nightmares?
Ah, good question. I have to say that part of what I enjoyed about writing the book was stalking Target and seeing where I would live and where I would camp. So I tend to be a bit of a survivalist thinker, a doomsday prepper. So is it my worst nightmare? Kind of. It's kind of an itch that I needed to scratch. How would I survive? How do I do it? And I think actually that's a trend in post-apocalyptic fiction. I think that authors are sort of trying to imagine the worst case scenario as a way of exercising their own demons, exorcising.
So when you're writing these, are you thinking, well, young adults worry about these things, and that's why I'm going to include them, or I'm going to use them, or do you just let yourself go to where your imagination takes you?
I let myself go to where my imagination takes me, but I do think that for young adults, I think that one of the reasons why YA novels are now getting a little bit dark is that teens need to destroy the world of their parents. so they can create their own world. And so they, you rebel at what your parents have created for you so that you can go and make your own life. And that's what, in books like these, it's like, bam, the world's come apart. Now who are you going to be?
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you ever think that you could be leading kids down the path to destruction or inspiring destruction?
Personally, no. The world of my books, of this series, the Monument 14 series, is very dark, but I think it really gives the characters in it a chance to shine.
There are a lot of natural disasters. I mean, it's not like at least I've only read one of the 3 books, so I don't want to, conclude, but it seems like the disasters that have happened, while there are contributing forces by men, they are natural disasters.
Yes, the book has an escalating series of catastrophes. The first is a tsunami, then there's an earthquake, and then there's a chemical weapons leak from NORAD. And the chemical weapons that are unleashed are really diabolical and unholy. And so in that sense, it is sort of a man-made disaster. It would be pretty bad already, but NORAD went and made it worse.
We don't want to give away too much of it, but I must say once I started, I couldn't stop. Now, Amalie, your books, I guess we would call dystopian?
Well, so fantasy, urban fantasy was Bloodspell. I think Waterfell would be fantasy, paranormal, romance. And this is probably sci-fi. So I think dystopian's more like a future sort of destroyed world. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I didn't know where the lines were drawn on that. But your characters take us to an incredible fantasy. I mean, we talk about, and this is something with all of the characters. There are strong young adults, all of them. Most tend to be women. And in Amalie's books, there are supernatural qualities and characteristics of your heroines. But things don't always turn out so great.
Right.
Do you struggle with that?
I mean, it depends. When I'm writing my characters, I kind of let them lead me to where they're going. I knew when I, became a writer and wanted to write books, I wanted to write strong heroines. I was, I knew I wanted that. And, with Riven and the Almost Girl, she's a soldier from a parallel dimension who comes to our world to find a mysterious boy. She's been taught not to trust any emotions, not to be weak, any of those things. And she realizes that, by the end of the book, that being human or finding her humanity makes her stronger instead of weaker. So I like exploring those pathways. Like, if you're told something or brought up a certain way, if you meet someone or you're thrust into a situation that sort of brings out different strengths, will that change you? How's that going to shape you? That's kind of where I like to go with, my character arcs.
So when you start writing, you don't know where it's going to go?
No. And sometimes if I try to force them into a path they don't want to go, they rebel. They're like, we're not doing it. And then that's it. I'm like, okay.
You gotta work with those people.
Like, yeah, right.
Let me backspace a bit and start over.
Exactly.
Emmy, that's different for you. You know where you're going.
I do. Well, this series, each book has a very intricate plot. There's 14 characters I'm keeping track of. And so I had to have a really detailed outline. And I enjoy working from an outline. I have at the end of each day's work, I read ahead and see the scene I'll be writing the next day. And then when I go home and make dinner and play with my kids and go to bed, it's in my brain. It's sort of percolating. When I sit down the next day, it's ready to go.
Happens.
Yeah.
Wow. How about you?
I'm seat of the pants. I get started and I sometimes know where I'm going. I usually know where I want to end up, but I never have any idea how I'm going to get there. And I do the same thing. I let my character sort of take me where I'm supposed to go.
Interesting. Now, there are some themes in all 3 of your books, even though your books are all different. There are themes that I see repeated, and of course there's the love, romantic theme and the ambivalence about, who's right for you and those emerging feelings. There's also an environmental theme in all of your books that I thought was very interesting. Do you find that you are consumed with environmental issues, or do you think that teens or young adults would be?
I think there's a lot of anxiety in our culture about the way the world is headed, and I'm certainly, as there should be, I'm certainly concerned about the environment, and I think that writing about that I think it is something that teens are aware of and are concerned with. I think we have a real generation of citizens on our hands, emerging world citizens and citizens of the United States. And I think they're going to be really good at making change.
I think as a writer, we have to be conscious that, you know, these issues, you know, and you know, thoughts of environmental changes and pressures and climate and all that sort of stuff, marine conservancy, we don't want to write stuff that teens are going to think, you know, someone's preaching to me that I have to take care of the planet. Nobody wants to hear that. But if you layer it into your stories, or you show this is a possibility of what could happen within a fantastic setting, might make a difference, might get them to think differently about something.
You are consciously instructing?
I don't think it's a conscious instruction. I think it just, for me, it just kind of, I want to add dimension to the stories that I'm writing. And if I can do that, like in Waterfell, have a little bit of, you know, a teen thinking about taking care of the oceans because, hey, there's this fantastic species living in the Mariana Trench. You know, I'd do
Wherever
that.
that is.
Right. Deepest part of the world's oceans. So.
Well, another theme that I see repeated in all of your books, too, is the, how can I say this, difficulty with self-esteem that most of the female characters exhibit. Now, sometimes they're expressed by males as well, and maybe it's a natural state of growing up.
Yeah.
But you've all dealt with that also.
Well, that's the core of adolescence. I mean, I didn't know who I was when I was 15 years old. And I think that the struggle to know who you are and to honor who you are is, you know, most people don't get there till they're 40.
Then.
Or yeah, maybe tomorrow. But you know, that I think that's really the strongest struggle of adolescence, and I think it's at the heart of most YA books is who am I and how am I going to make an impact? And by you destroying the world and giving them that blank slate, I mean, I think that's a great jumping off point for figuring out who you are.
I have to say that I think this is one of the reasons, the theme of identity and those delicious firsts that you were talking about, you know, your first kiss, the first time you drove a car, the first time you were out at night and your parents didn't know where you were, all of those wonderful firsts. I think that's a reason why adults come to YA literature. I think they're excited to go back in time to that kind of magical time. And I think it's why it's fun to write it.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's fun to imagine, to cast myself back to that time.
It's a lot of life or death, you know, a lot of like, I'm going to die if this boy doesn't look at me. I remember that, you know. A lot of, you know, she said firsts, and that discovery is, yeah.
But often you put your characters in very precarious situations where they really could die. And I don't mean because the boyfriend didn't call
Right,
or
sure.
didn't ask them to the dance. I mean,
Or
they're
maybe a little bit of both.
well, but they're in some pretty treacherous situations, which of course is very exciting. Do you think that many adolescents crave that excitement?
I think they do, and the reason for that, from my perspective, is that a teen would want to read about a character that's in that situation, not that it lessens what they're going through, but they like seeing them pushed to the edge. Because a real life situation might seem life or death, but when you read about something in the book that may be like a chemicals weapons disaster, or, you know, she fries her brain, you know, with her, whatever, nanobes, you know, it makes it more intense, I think.
See, I think what you also do, what you've all accomplished, is giving voice to fears or concerns that young adults have. And I mean, tell me if I'm wrong. Maybe they can express them. I know my teens never did, but when they were teens. And maybe some families they can, but they probably all are pretty informed about what's going on in the world and probably troubled. I mean,
I think,
if you're informed, you're troubled.
Yeah, yeah. Well, reading a book is a great way to learn through other people's mistakes,
Exactly.
right? And when you're a teenager, when you're a kid, and when you're an adult for that matter, I mean, that's important. You don't want to have to ask every girl to the dance and have them say no. When you could read about it and learn, all right, how'd that guy ask a girl to the dance? How'd it work for him? You know?
Or disasters like pregnancy. You know, you don't have to get pregnant to know that that was a bummer. You know, you can read about somebody getting pregnant and see how that works out.
Right.
And maybe you don't have to do that yourself.
Oh, God.
You know, this,
Yes.
this goes back to your first question where you asked about whether writing about something that's destructive leads a teen down that path. I actually think it's the reverse. And the reason I say that is I read, I mean, Go Ask Alice when I was a teenager. That's a very, very dark book. But I was terrified about drug use and what would happen, pregnancy, that sort of thing. Same thing I read an anorexia book when I was a teenager, and I think that's the book that saved my life when I became sick, because I just said I don't want to be the girl that was in that book walking down the hospital trying to burn calories with an IV.
Now, did you come to those books on your own, or did parents or other people lead you to some books?
Well, I'm 42. All right, it's out there now. It's
my
a matter of public record. Wow. So when I was growing up, when I was a teenager, there weren't YA books. There was no genre for us, which is fine. But so I was reading some stuff my mom had, and when I got upset, I would reread the Little House on the Prairie series for comfort.
And Green Gables. That was mine.
Yeah, I read that, and a lot of Jackie Collins. I mean,
Nice flip, right?
You have to sneak those?
Yeah.
No, we were allowed in my house. You could read whatever you could read. That was the rule.
Wonderful.
If you could read it, you could read it. So I read a lot.
And that's wonderful. Nobody would say that's not wonderful. But when you're reading way above your age range, you can get into stuff that's inappropriate for you. I remember I read The Color Purple when I was about 10. And my mom came home from a business trip. She was like, wait a minute, you read The Color Purple while I was in Los Angeles? Oh my God, we have to talk. And I didn't really understand a lot of it, but now there are so many books for young adults, so many great books. And you know why Twilight was such a hit? It's puritanical. It's completely chaste. There's nothing dirty in that book. It is so safe and clean. And a 12-year-old could read it and be whisked into the romance and never once have to think about anything that was too adult, too mature.
Are there any books that you would like to not see your children or children who are dear to you read?
For me, as much as I adore Suzanne Collins and I love the Hunger Games series, but my 9-year-old is asked to read it, and I have said, I think he's read everything from Rick Riordan, Harry Potter, pretty much any C.S. Lewis. He's read the entire series. He's a very
Precocious reader.
Yeah, voracious reader, and he asked me to read that, and I've kind of said I'll wait a year or so. I think there's some themes in it that I'm not, as a parent, quite willing to. Which is weird because in the media and his friends and everyone's discussing it anyway, so I'm not really sure why I'm saying not yet.
And the truth is, do we really have the control these days with technology?
Right.
And the kids
Another
are out
parent told
there.
me he probably has it already.
Nah, you have control as a parent. I mean, you can guide your kids. My kids aren't allowed to read my books until they're 12 or 13.
Right.
So.
And you control that how?
She has not taught them to read. That was well played. You really thought that through.
My illiterate children.
Are you ever approached by teachers, churches, other community leaders to come talk to kids about your books?
Yeah.
All the time.
And how do you feel about that?
I love talking to kids about my books. I could do it every day. It's my favorite thing to do. And they, as you were saying earlier, they point out things in your books that you didn't know you included.
Is that fun for you?
It's really fun, and then you think about it in sort of a different way, and it inspires you. Yeah, I love to do that.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
I agree. Very provoking discussion sometimes with different ages. My favorite age group is that probably 8th grade. I just like it. 8th and younger. I've taught from 6th graders, 5th graders, 8th graders, and college age, which was my least favorite, because they know everything.
Oh, really? I thought college age didn't. I thought it was the teenagers who knew everything.
No, they're more willing to discuss different themes.
Okay.
At the college level, I found it I felt very nervous.
Did anybody ever offer you criticism that was helpful? I don't mean your peers or your publishers, but people who've read your books.
Yeah, I did a well, certainly with Monument 14, my debut, I read a lot of online reviews, and they killed me. Everyone, the review could be a 4 or 5-star review, and it would say, I love this, I love this, I love this, but I hated this one thing. And I would, why did I write that one thing? And so I stopped reading the user reviews because I feel like I get more direct feedback from my beta readers and my editor, my publisher. So I don't tend to read too many reviews, but I do really enjoy interacting with kids. And the questions that they ask can be so outrageous. Like I just was with some kids recently, and one of the questions I got was, are you rich?
Every time.
Is that what they ask
Time
you?
they ask me,
think?
how much money do you get paid to write a book?
Yeah, yeah.
And I say,
Do you
just,
say $50?
I say not as much as J.K. Rowling gets paid.
Right,
Good answer.
Isn't that interesting? Do you find that we're recording in Westchester County, and there are certainly many affluent communities here. Do you find that's a question you get from more affluent communities, or is that widespread?
No, all everywhere.
Yeah, all
Everywhere.
communities.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, if somebody comes in on career day and they're saying they're a doctor, you sort of want to know, you know, how much money do you get made? So it's just a funny thing to go speak as a writer, and that's every single time I get that question.
Does it make you uncomfortable?
Not really.
Okay.
Not really. I answer it in a vague way.
I think it's a charming question, and I think it's very open. And it's like, well, are you rich? It's quite lovely, actually. It's just very honest, and I just say no. You know, I'm not, but I'm happy to be here.
But you
talking
wonder
with
if children are looking for career paths of their own.
Yeah.
They've obviously been inspired by you, but they also know they have to make a living, and maybe they're asking, is it possible to do this?
I think that is what the question is at the heart
And
of
it's a
it.
hard way to make a living. I mean, it really is. You don't come out of school and get a job as a writer writing novels. I mean, you have to be doing something else to support yourself.
Well, that brings us to another really good question. While we only have a couple of minutes left, how do you get published these days? I know people are struggling terribly, and we hear about, you know, people don't buy books, and there are technical copies, or we, you know, read things on our iPads and our Kindles, and authors are not being compensated the way they might have been years ago. I mean, what is it like for you? How do you get an agent? How do you get a publisher?
The publishing landscape is so dynamic. I think this is probably, I don't know if you'll agree with me, it's one of the best times to be an author just because there's so many options. And all of them you can, you know, be successful. You can, if you choose to do the self-publishing route, you know, you can do your own covers, do your own stuff as long as you get edited, and you get the same kind of, you know, it didn't have this stigma that it did 10 years ago.
It's not like
and
a
then in
vanity
traditional
press.
publishing,
Right.
you know, traditional publishers are trying to, I think, figure out ways to navigate that growing area. And I mean, you guys can add to that.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of support from other writers or people who are trying to get published. So you can send out your query and get feedback, and send out your synopsis and get feedback. And so people are helping each other to get in there. That said, I think the best way to get published is to write and write and write until you write a really good book. And it takes a lot of pages. There was a wonderful, wonderful photograph in the LA Times about screenwriters who were nominated for Best Screenplay, and they were standing with the stacks of screenplays they'd written. And they were like, I won't gesture, but they were 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet tall.
Well, how do you keep yourself motivated and not cave to so many rejections?
You talk to other authors and you hear their stories.
You know what's nice about a rejection? I find that every rejection letter that I've had from a publisher makes a really good point. You know, you kind of lost the voice in the middle of this chapter.
So it meant they read your book.
Yeah, and then I read that and I think, you know what? I think I did lose the voice in that middle of that chapter.
So
and I
constructive.
go and revise it. I mean, you have professionals who are reading your work. You might as well really listen to what they say.
I see. So very
Fair point.
elucidating. Well, we haven't any time left, but in the 1 minute, I'd like to just ask you, who are you reading now? Annabelle?
I'm reading What Alice Forgot by Lane Moriarty.
Okay. Emmy?
I'm reading The Living by Matt de la Pena.
Okay.
Oh man, it's good.
Emily, do you have time to read?
Yeah, I do. I just finished reading Eleanor and Park by Rainbow Rowell, and it's amazing. And I just started Winter's Curse, which apparently is amazing. I haven't even started it yet, by Marie
Rutowski.
And it's, rave reviews.
Well, let me take this opportunity to thank you all. This has been a lovely conversation. I enjoyed it, and I hope to do it again soon. Thanks for being here. It is a very difficult night to be traveling, so I certainly appreciate your being here. I'm Alice Bloom. This is A Town and Village 2. We'll see you next time.